We all have a shadow, a figure within us. We try to cover up that dark side of our personality. Selfish, ruthless, cruel, egocentric. We all have it. Yes, even you. You know you're not that nice. Tell me, what are you hiding? Which mask are you wearing today? That nice version of you? That person who wants to be liked? The one who always seems to go along with whatever other people want? What if I told you you could use your shadow to transform? Step into the darkness. Embrace it. Channel it. Dance with it. And maybe even become it. Imagine how limitless your life could be.
A shadow, one could say, is simply the dark area produced by some object coming between rays of light and a surface. But for someone like Carl Jung, the shadow signifies a far more literary personification. The shadow is perceived as an entity of its own that is welded and chained within the realm of our deep unconscious mind. A spectre that we all possess, but also one too frightening for many of us to ever build the courage to face. A spectre that can never be defeated, but if tamed can lead to personal cultivation and the evolution of mind and body. But what is the shadow? According to Jung, the shadow possesses the most inferior characteristics of the psyche that all men try to relinquish. The shadow might be a desire frowned upon by our conscience or peers. It might be a bizarre or unhealthy interest that the powers of civilization have apparently quelled. Shadow contents invoke known and unknown aspects of the self, making the ego, the unconscious, and the environment all play a role in its expression or repression. When confronted by the ego, the largely unconscious shadow can be integrated into consciousness. But, for the most part, the shadow lies beyond the threshold of awareness. It is quite within possibility for man to recognize the relative evil of his nature, but it is a rare and shattering experience for him to gaze into the face of absolute evil.
It is a frightening thought that man has a shadow side to him, consisting not just of little weaknesses and foibles, but of a positively demonic dynamism. The individual seldom knows anything of this. To him, as an individual, it is incredible that he should ever, in any circumstance, go beyond himself. But let these harmless creatures form a mass, and there emerges a raging monster, and each individual is only one tiny cell in the monster's body. So for better or worse, he must accompany it on its bloody rampage, and even assist it to the utmost. Jung also stresses the importance of externalizing shadow material through socially acceptable channels to bring its inherent darkness to light. The ego is able to integrate rather than repress unpleasant subconscious impulses. When merely repressed, the shadow finds a way through the cracks of the psyche and jumps out in disturbing ways. Given that every human being has a wide variety and range of traits, impulses, and emotions, every individual, by necessity, has a shadow. Some of these characteristics are repressed and hidden, both to oneself and to others. To oneself, so that one can navigate through life with a conviction that one is a holy and good virtuous human being. And to others, so that one can fit in and succeed socially. Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on a whole, less good than he imagines himself to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and unless it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. At all counts, it forms an unconscious snag, thwarting our most well-meant intentions. When one's shadow is relegated to the depths of the unconscious, it can wreak havoc on one's life, in the sense that it will exert unconscious control over one's thoughts, emotions, choices, and actions. That which we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. As Jung said, this accounts for the self-destructive behaviors so many individuals struggle with and are unable to control, despite consciously knowing they would be better off not engaging in such actions. The task in life, which thus confronts everyone, according to Jung, is to become conscious of and integrate one's shadow into one's conscious personality, accepting it with open arms, not as an abhorrent aspect of oneself, but as a necessary and vital part of one's being. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. The concept of a shadow has been both championed and critiqued among opposing perspectives. Most theologians say we cannot solely rely on ourselves or the limited power of the ego to deal with the shadow. Instead, we must call upon the power of God to overcome evil. You cannot do it alone. Lean on the Lord, the religious person exclaims. But this is a projection trap that some traditional religious people seem to fall into. Sanctimonious individuals and related religious organizations project their own dark impulses onto others instead of facing the evil within themselves. This ugly dynamic may result in scapegoating. Luckily, we have laws in the civilized world that protect people from this kind of primitive mentality. The spirituality of organized religion seems to only go as far as the persona, where individuals play a superficial role of holiness for the sake of appearances and to feel good about themselves. This dynamic might account for a Catholic nun's cruel treatment of children, or the horrifying outbreak of pedophile priests and brothers, or the Islamic caliphate that must permeate itself through the East. The beheadings of non-believers tolerated and preached by prominent sheiks. As a result of ignorance, the shadow was never faced by the religious man. It is falsely assumed by the religious man that the shadow within him is of a foreign entity, an external enemy ceaselessly attempting to pierce through the heart of the righteous and corrupt all good men. The man forgets that the devil itself is not an outsider, but is harbored deep within the dark fortress of his own subconscious. Ironically, according to Jung, we may all need to become the exorcists of our innermost demons. Jung says, the shadow must be confronted. When repressed, the shadow lurks like an angry dragon in a dungeon, if not sublimated, which simply means the transformation of unwanted impulses into something less harmful. The shadow's sheer power can break free of its chains, causing severe psychological and possible physical injury. Jung believed that all inspiring creativity was conceived once the individual had formed a union or bond with the shadow. The inventive artist who deals with dramatic and foreboding themes, such as the Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch, creates works of art that provokes a profound feeling of reverence, terror, and bewilderment. Another way the shadow expresses itself is through parapraxis. Parapraxis are commonly known as Freudian slips of a pen or tongue, brought about by intrusions of an unconscious desire, conflict, or thought. It is like an error in speech, memory, or physical action that is interpreted as occurring due to the interference of an unconscious, subdued wish or internal train of thought, usually socially embarrassing. These slips can nevertheless point to aspects of the unconscious that require further exploration and expression. In confronting the shadow, Jung isn't promoting being pretentious or arrogant. Instead, he's encouraging awareness and mastery over the powers of darkness. When we must deal with problems, we instinctively resist trying the way that leads through obscurity and darkness. We wish to hear only from unequivocal results and completely forget that these results can only be brought about when we have ventured into and emerged again from the darkness. But to penetrate the darkness, we must summon all the powers of enlightenment that consciousness can offer. However, as Jung alludes to in the above quote, confronting the shadow is extremely difficult, let alone harnessing its power. Most cannot and will not admit that deep down they are not wholly virtuous, selfless and good human beings, but instead contain selfish, destructive, amoral and immoral impulses and capacities. Most people would rather deceive themselves with a blind optimism about the goodness of their nature, and according to Jung, thus remain a fragmented individual, as it is only by becoming conscious of and integrating the shadow that one achieves wholeness. What is especially interesting is the idea that the shadow contains not only destructive and evil aspects of personality, but also harbors potent, creative and powerful capabilities. The shadow, when realized, is the source of renewal. The new and productive impulses cannot come from the established values of the ego, when there is an impasse and sterile time in our lives. Despite inadequate ego development, we must look into the dark, hitherto unacceptable side which has been at our conscious disposal. This brings us to the fundamental fact that the shadow is a doorway to our individuality, and so far as the shadow renders us our first view of the unconscious part of our personality, it represents the first stage towards meeting the self. There is in fact no access to the unconscious and to our own reality but through the shadow. Only when we realize the part of ourselves which we have not hitherto been to see or prefer not to see, can we proceed to question and find the sources from which it feeds and the basis on which it rests. Interestingly enough, back in ancient India, there was a minority who were close to integrating both the light and shadow selves. This would have allowed them to reach their true potential. They were known as the Varmakarans, or left-hand tantric practitioners. These people had a primitive, albeit misguided outlook on life. They both embraced and indulged in such taboo practices as eating meat, hunting, animal and human sacrifice, the use of alcohol, cannabis and other hallucinogens, spirit possession, as well as the worship of terrifying deities. And disturbingly, they even used magical spells and potions for the purposes of rape and recommended ritual incest as offering spiritual reward. Their underlying logic is that through engaging in such forbidden practices, one could transcend dualistic thought, tap into hidden power sources, and unite with the divine. Doing so would result in the widespread tantric goals of Siddhis, magical powers, physical vitality, and even immortality. But any modern-day intellectually sound person can plainly see that that is a load of bullshit. On the other hand, facing the shadow and learning to integrate it, now that's another story. Ultimately, that leads to the improvement for the select few who choose to do so. Most people who are cowards disguise their cowardice as morality, and they claim that they're harmless, which is a consequence of their fear and inability to be harmful, or to be dangerous, which is actually a sign of where their moral integrity is truly at. That's just their persona, and a persona is that mask that you wear. And that's what persona means. It's the mask that you wear to convince yourself in the world that you're not a terrible monster, so that when you look at yourself in the mirror, you don't have to run away screaming, because of a revelation of all the dark deeds you know you're truly capable of.
Kind people find that they are cruel. Brave men discover that they are really cowards. Confronted with their true selves, most men run away screaming.
And that's a very unpleasant revelation. It's also one of the things that stops people from being enlightened, because that revelation of the evil of self is a part of the journey of enlightenment, and an early part at that. You see, the shadow would be all the parts of a personality that the persona rejects, and that might be the aggressive elements. Certainly that is the case for people who are hyper-agreeable. A practical approach to developing the shadow. There's two pathways to the development of the shadow, and they're tightly aligned with one another. The fundamental pathway is truth, and that's to face the bitter truth about yourself. But to break that down more particularly, you might think about it as the capacity to observe your own resentment. You're going to be resentful and bitter in many situations, because you don't get what you want. And if you watch that resentment and bitterness, you'll see that it produces fantasies that are unbelievably dark,
And that can be a frightening thing. And you might not want to admit to yourself that you're actually capable of having fantasies, impulses, or aggressive feelings like that. But the thing is, if those aggressive feelings, impulses, and fantasies are integrated into your character, it's like you're opening up an inner dialogue with that part of yourself that can be very forceful, strong, and dangerous. And it can be really useful to be dangerous sometimes. Because if you can be dangerous, you often don't have to be. Generally speaking, it's often weak people who sexually assault children. Sadly, that's a very common occurrence. And that's a truly deplorable and violent act. But it's born out of weakness, not out of strength, that's for sure. In dealing with your shadow self, you must attend to your resentment honestly. And you must observe yourself and what you're actually like. You gotta pay attention as if you don't actually know yourself. As in fact, deep down, you may be harboring inner demons and devils. So the practical approach to developing your shadow is to contemplate and consider your resentment. And pay attention to what it has to say. And because your resentment will also tell you what you have to say. If you're feeling oppressed at work, or you're oppressed in your life, or you're simply oppressing yourself, then you've got to notice that you're feeling oppressed. Then you'll have noticed that you're feeling resentful, angry, or bitter. And then you have to decide what it is that you need to do in order to remove that bitterness from yourself. And that usually means that there's something you have to say. And then you have to say it, because your soul depends on it. And not only does your soul depend on it, but perhaps even the fate of the world depends on it. Because you might be wrong, and then you should be straightened out. Maybe you're just being whiny, and you have to talk to somebody about that. But it may be that you're actually detecting something wrong, some tyranny that's directed towards you and other people. And it's your moral obligation to speak out about it. So many relationships become toxic to us, a terrible cliche I know, because people in them won't speak up for what they actually want. Or they speak up too late, and then they're all twisted up about it. And then they end up emotionally torturing the other person because they're so unhappy and so on and so forth. So the best practical approach to developing the shadow, fundamentally, is radical, brutal honesty. One could succumb to the dark impulses of their shadow, but reject the unconscious darkness and rediscover the light within with new understanding. The willingness towards self-understanding makes this journey possible. Evil informs good, and this leads to balance in one's soul. Your fears are only phantoms, false expectations appearing real. But fear can be a good thing. It's a requirement if you want to change and grow. We all have a shadow. That selfish, arrogant, ruthless part of ourselves that we try to keep hidden away. I got lucky. I met my shadow. And now I know he's not trying to destroy me. Instead, he's trying to complete me. Because there is no light without darkness. What about you? Have you found your shadow? It starts with an admission. Yes, the shadow is a part of me. All those things I don't like about myself. And I choose to love and forgive. I choose to become the real me. I choose to live life to my full potential. Hey guys, this is Brendan Lee here. Thanks for watching. This has been the hardest video I've ever made. A lot of time and effort went into this. I've struggled with it because I'm severely dyslexic. So even reading out my own writing is extremely difficult. That's why we use artificial voices sometimes, and I do apologize for that. But I want to make sure my team and I are always giving you really good content. Please comment, share with your friends, and like and subscribe. It really helps us when you do that. On behalf of Sensual Living, we hope that you all enjoyed watching this video. We're here to serve you. So, if you have any ideas on what topics you'd like us to cover on our channel, please feel free to message us. And remember to keep an eye out for our latest videos about sex, love, and so much more. Again, thanks for watching, and don't forget to check out our website. The link is in the description below. Well, that's it for now. I hope we see you again soon.